Welcome to the Pentateuch, an introduction to the first 5 books of the Bible. My name is Mark Teagle, and I serve as the Director of Spiritual Formation at Wesley United Methodist Church in San Jose's Japantown neighborhood. Our purpose today is to cover an outline of these foundational books of the Bible. I would encourage you to read them for yourself, to spend some time digesting the wonderful stories, and to ponder the great truths they contain. But it is also important to see the grand sweep of the stories and how they relate to one another. So by surveying them in an abbreviated manner, I hope to offer some perspective. Pentateuch refers to the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which is also the Hebrew Bible. These stories are shared by the 3 major Abrahamic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham is the founder, in a way, of all 3 of these major world religions. Genesis deals with the beginnings, from creation to the founding of the nation of Israel, and ends with them migrating to Egypt. Exodus deals with the coming out, the exit from Egypt. It also covers much of the time in the wilderness and the giving of the law of Moses. Leviticus is named after the priests, or Levites, and deals with the administration of the law by the priests. Numbers covers more of the law, laying out the tribes and the preparation to enter the promised land. Deuteronomy, or second law, restates the law and brings the people of God to the edge of the promised land, where they will enter under Joshua as the Old Testament story continues. We begin with Genesis, the very first book in the Pentateuch. Sometimes the word Torah is used. Torah can mean these first 5 books, but it can also refer to the entire Hebrew Bible. Genesis deals with the 2 stories of creation: the fall of humanity, the judgment of Noah's flood, and the dispersing of the nations. Then the book focuses in on the nation founded by Abraham and continues with his son Isaac. Then we get the story of Jacob, or Israel, and his 12 sons. We then follow his favorite son Joseph to Egypt, where the story of Genesis leaves us. In the first chapters of Genesis, there are actually 2 creation stories. The first is told as a poem, where the elements of creation are divided into days. It is important to note that the Bible was written before historical and scientific methods were thought about. These are ancient literary forms and are not meant to be taken literally. So when Genesis talks about God creating the world in 7 days, this is a poetic form and not a literal accounting of how creation actually happened. It is written as a myth, not because it didn't happen, but that it is written to convey deeper truths. The second creation story focuses on the first humans: Adam, which is Hebrew for the man, and Eve. Adam is created from dust and Eve from his rib. They are meant to be partners or companions, but they are tempted and sin. This injures the relationship they have with God, and they are expelled from the Garden of Eden. The fact that there are 2 creation stories helps scholars realize that these Old Testament books are the work of more than one author. In fact, they have been able to trace the work of at least 4 different sources in the book of Genesis. Each author brought their own perspective and vocabulary to the work, but a final editor stitched it together to give us the book in its final form. The fall refers to this act of eating the fruit from the tree, being driven from paradise, and fated to live a life of hard labor and unease. They have children, but in the first of many examples of sibling rivalry, Cain the hunter murders his farmer brother Abel. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Abel asked God when asked about the deed. Evil has entered the world, but it is Adam's descendants that populate the earth. The growing wickedness of humanity becomes so great that God is sorry that he created them. The one exception is Noah. So God puts into motion a plan to reset the earth by saving just one family and the animals from destruction. Noah builds an ark, gathers 2 of every kind of animal, then enters the ark with his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. Everything is wiped out by the flood, caused by unending rain for 40 days and 40 nights. When the water subsides, a dove is sent out to find land and returns with an olive branch. This becomes a symbol of peace. The rainbow in the sky is a sign of God's covenant, a 2-way promise with Noah that God will never again flood the whole earth. The story resumes after the flood by telling about the descendants of Noah from his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem fathers the Semites, Jews, and Arabs. We get the word Semitic from Shem. So anti-Semitism is discrimination aimed at these people. Ham's descendants settled in Africa. Sadly, some of the justification of the treatment of black people through history has been based on judgment aimed at Ham's descendants in the book of Genesis. The last incident that Genesis covers, meant to explain a global phenomenon, is the story of the Tower of Babel. People were exulting in their own greatness and decided to build a tower reaching to heaven. God confused their languages, and the tower project failed. People dispersed because of this. So this explains, to the satisfaction of the ancient Israelites, why there are multiple languages around the world. Starting with Abraham in chapter 12, the story of the Hebrew Bible focuses in on one people group. A man named Abram receives a call from God to go to a new land where God will bless him to be a blessing. Abram and his wife Sarai are promised this land and a great nation from his descendants. So Abram and Sarai go to this new place. He is given the new name Abraham, which means father of nations. Sarai becomes Sarah. There is just one problem. Abraham and Sarah are both old, and Sarah is barren. She offers her servant Hagar to her husband, and Hagar gives birth to Ishmael. From Ishmael will come the Arabic people and the Islamic faith. Abraham's descendants are to be the chosen people, chosen by the grace of God. They will be as numerous as the stars, but they are blessed to be a blessing. Through them, God will bless all the people of the earth. During this time, we also have the story of Lot, Abraham's nephew, and the very confusing story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Those cities are judged. Lot's wife looks back when they are leaving and turns into a pillar of salt, and Abraham's story continues. Sarah becomes pregnant at long last and gives birth to their son Isaac. The name Isaac means laughter, because Sarah laughed when she was told she would give birth even in her old age. Now that Sarah has a son of her own, she sends Hagar and Ishmael away, and tragically sets into motion 4 millennia of warfare in the Middle East. And in the midst of all this, God asks Abraham to take his son Isaac to the top of a mountain and sacrifice him. At the last moment, a ram is provided for the sacrifice, and Isaac is allowed to live. Sarah dies, and it is time for Isaac to take the lead in the story. Abraham sends a servant back to his relatives to find a wife for his son Isaac. Rebekah is found and comes back to Mary. She and Isaac have twins, one hairy and red named Esau, and the younger named Jacob, who came out grasping his twin brother's heel. Esau grows to be a rugged hunter, and Jacob is softer and stays closer to his mother. One day Esau returns from hunting and is so hungry he sells his birthright to his brother for some stew. Later, at his mother's urging, Jacob impersonates his brother to get the blessing from his father Isaac. When Isaac finds out about this, Jacob is forced to flee from him. On his flight, Jacob rests and has a vision. He sees angels going up and down a ladder in the air. This is the inspiration for the spiritual, "We are climbing Jacob's ladder." On his journey, he meets a girl named Rachel. Her father, Laban, wants to give his older daughter, Leah, in marriage first. Jacob agrees to work 7 years to marry Rachel. But Laban switches the girls on the wedding night, and Jacob ends up married to Leah. He works another 7 years for Rachel. During this time, his family and his flocks prosper. With his 2 wives and 2 concubines, he has a total of 12 sons. These sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. One night, Jacob wrestles with God and is renamed Israel, or one who contends or wrestles with God. Jacob finally makes peace with his brother Esau and settles in an area called Bethel, or the house of God. Of Jacob's 12 sons, his favorite is Joseph, whose mother is Rachel. He gives Joseph a coat of many colors, and his brothers are jealous. When Joseph shares his dreams of greatness, that all his brothers will bow down to him, they are fed up. They sell Joseph into slavery and dip his coat in goat's blood to tell their father that he had been killed. Jacob is devastated. Joseph ends up in Egypt as a slave to a man named Potiphar. Potiphar sees Joseph's abilities and puts him in charge of his household. When his master's wife tries unsuccessfully to bed Joseph, she falsely accuses Joseph of making advancements on her. Joseph is thrown into prison. There he continues to interpret dreams for fellow prisoners. Pharaoh's butler and baker are in prison, and Joseph correctly interprets their dreams. When Pharaoh has troubling dreams, his former fellow prisoner remembers Joseph and brings him to Pharaoh. The dream predicts 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh is so impressed by Joseph's abilities that he pulls him out of prison and puts him over the nation as it stores food in the years of plenty to prepare for the years of famine. When the famine hits, Egypt is prepared thanks to Joseph. Other nations, including Joseph's father and brothers, are soon coming to Egypt to buy food. Joseph recognizes his brothers when they come. He tests them and soon is reunited with them. They bring their father and all their families to Egypt to live. In the end, Joseph forgives his brothers. "You meant it for evil," Joseph said, "but God meant it for good." So the saga of Genesis begins with creation, traces this one family through history, and ends with them living in Egypt.